Welcome to Catholic Restoration Conference 5. This is Judith Sharpe. Our special guest today is John Vennari, editor of Catholic Family News. John has been a participant at every ISOC conference, and we welcome him back to ISOC now as we begin our 7th year of interviews. You may recall that a couple of months ago we began a new series of talks on what Father Dennis Fahey calls the anti-Catholic forces in the world. We've heard from Hugh Akins on the Jewish force when we discussed his new book, Synagogue Rising, and from Cornelia Ferreira regarding the occult forces. Now we turn to the third force that Father identifies, the Masonic force. Mr. Vennari has titled his visit, Revolution in Tierra and Cope, Alive and Well. Hey, John, hi. It is so neat to have you with us. Happy New Year.
Yes, same to you.
Good to have you. Now, okay, we're going to have a little interview with you about the revolution in Tierra and Cope, alive and well. And I guess it is alive and well, but you're going to tell us all about that, I hope.
Well, there's plenty to say.
Yeah. Now, where I'd like to start, if you don't mind, is with the pamphlet that you produced, I think it was 1999, called The Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita. Did I say that right?
Vendita, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I had Italian school me in that. It's Alta Vendita.
Okay,
and
well,
for
good.
the listeners, it's two words, A-L-T-A-V-E-N-D-I-T-A, Alta Vendita.
And the reason we're talking about this is because we have become aware of the fact that still a lot of people are unaware of this whole thing. So
yes.
let's get in it. First of all, tell us what it is.
Well, the Alta Vendita is a secret document from the 19th century that came from Freemasonry. It was a document that really laid out a blueprint, a strategy for the destruction of the church, but also not so much, and this is interesting, is a key point, not so much to destroy the church as if we would bring in wrecking balls and tear it down, but rather to infiltrate the church with Masonic ideas and then to use the church itself as an instrument to promote those ideas, not under the slogan of Masonry, but under slogans of human dignity, human solidarity, consensus, freedom of religion. These are all basically Masonic terms and Masonic principles that came from the so-called Enlightenment of 1789, the French Revolution. The French Revolution was a complete Masonic-inspired revolution because, as Father Dennis Fahey points out, you don't need to really try to prove it because the Masons boast of it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
This was their operation. So I think it was Bishop Rudolph Graber. He wrote a book in 1974. Well, I don't say I think it was. It was Bishop Rudolph Graber in his 1974 book, Athanasius and the Church of Our Time. And he quotes a Freemason. He says, and I'm quoting here, the goal is no longer the destruction of the church, but to make use of it by infiltrating it.
See, and I love that because this plays right into the discussion we had not too long ago with a couple of men about Bella Dodd. People just do not believe this infiltration. They don't see it. They don't understand it. And yet here you're saying a long, long time ago that was part of their plan, long before Bella Dodd was around. John, go back for 1 second. That Alta Vendita was a lodge, wasn't it, in Italy?
Yes, it was. It was through the Carbonari, I believe,
mm-hmm.
and which was a lodge, which was a group in Italy. And what's most important is Pope Pius IX recognized the reality of this document. It was published by a Frenchman named Crétin Joly in the middle of the 19th century. Pope Leo XIII recognized the reality of the Alta Vendita document, the plan. There is a book that it's now called Grand Orient Freemasonry Unmasked by Monsignor George Dillon, and this was published towards the end of the 19th century. And according to Michael Davies, Pope Leo XIII was so impressed with that book that at his own expense, he had it published in Italian. And in Monsignor Dillon's book is an entire reproduction of the Alta Vendita. So we see that Pope Pius IX and Leo XIII, they took these documents very serious. They took this document very seriously. They recognized the reality of it. They didn't dismiss it as, the way people today are conditioned, this is just conspiracy theory, don't pay any attention to it. Leo XIII issued an entire encyclical against Freemasonry, and one of the things he said is, we must tear the mask off of Freemasonry to show what it really is.
Yeah, I remember that. One of the things about these people, too, that I find kind of interesting that I read in your little pamphlet was that they're not in a hurry. They bring these principles or these mindsets to the people, but they know that they're not going to maybe see the fruition of this whole thing. They're not going to see when it all takes place, but they don't care. They just work underground and just keep moving straight ahead, don't they?
Well, this is actually, dare I say it about the enemy, a level of maturity that many of us don't have, and that is we want instant gratification. We want to go to the government.org website and fill out a petition, and we expect, in 2 weeks some savior congressman is going to take hold of this petition and change everything overnight, and then we're going to be fine. It's a real instant gratification and unrealistic and somewhat immature. Whereas these men were very solid in their ideas and very, dare I say, mature in their approach, because in the Alta Vendita, it makes very clear that we are initiating, I'm speaking as the Freemasons now, we are initiating something that's going to we probably won't see the fruition in our lifetime. This might take a number of generations to finally, for fruition of this. And even in the document itself, it says the soldier dies, but the struggle goes forward.
Yeah, I saw that. That's kind of what I was thinking about. And then these liberal ideas. I mean, they're just downright liberal, and they're just pushing them. They push them into everything, didn't they? Into the laity, the seminarians, whatever.
Well, we could read the entire quote from the Alta Vendita, but just to give a quick summary, basically the plan of the Alta Vendita was not necessarily to have a Freemason elected pope, and then the pope would change everything. They were actually against that idea, at least back then. Basically, what they wanted was they wanted to permeate society with their principles, with their so-called humanitarian principles, what I call, I say this in quotes, the kinder, gentler principles of religious indifferentism. It doesn't really matter what religion you belong to as long as you're a good person. False ideas regarding human freedom, that man is pretty much free to do anything he wants, provided he doesn't step on the toes of his neighbor. Separation of church and state, that the church is one body of truths, and the state and real life is another body of truths, and you can have your private religious belief if you want. But politics and science, this is where real truth lies, and so we have to keep these things separated. And this overall man-centeredness in society, where Jesus Christ is off to the side, he's something private, but he's not really taken into consideration. His life, his law, his church are not really taken into consideration in the daily commerce and governing and of society and social institutions. And so the Masonic ideas, then what we'll call these liberal ideas, these man-centered ideas, will permeate the landscape. They'll become the very air we breathe. We won't even know that we have imbued and have come to believe principles that actually come from an atheistic humanism, which is and naturalism. Archbishop Lefebvre himself, he says that before he went to the French seminary, he grew up in France in the first part of the 20th century. He's born, I think, in 1907, 1905, somewhere there. And he said that up until the time he went to the French seminary, he thought separation of church and state was a good thing.
Yeah, see, people do. They all think that. Keep
going.
Yeah,
and we'll need to go into a little bit, about that, because it sends people shrieking into the snowbanks when you say the separation of church and state is not a Catholic thing. But maybe we can come back to that later. But the point is that he himself basically had been a victim of the modernist thinking, the liberal thinking, and it was when he went to the French seminary under the magnificent guidance of Father Laflaque, who explained to him that these principles are actually contrary to the truth, contrary to the faith, and that the popes of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century spoke vigorously against them. So the idea then was to have these principles, these so-called kind of gentlemanly principles, become the very air we breathe, that young boys get them in the schools, even in the Catholic schools. They get them in high school. They get these principles in college. It's in the newspapers. It's in entertainment. It's all over the place. It is our very atmosphere. And so when we go into this, when the young man goes into the seminary, he already has a head full of these humanistic-inspired ideas.
Yeah.
And some of it sounds somewhat Catholic, human dignity, human solidarity, all of this. And so the more and more these humanistic ideas become part of the landscape, becomes part of the thinking, then it's going to be much easier to bring those ideas into the church and kind of baptize them as Catholic, the updating of Catholic teaching for modern times.
Well, it must have been, when you talked about France, Archbishop Lefebvre in France, of course, after the Enlightenment and the upheaval and revolution there, it was probably pretty easy for the progressives to get moving with the people and imbue these principles to them. In this country, wouldn't you say that our Protestant background, the fact that this country was really a Protestant country, made it very easy for them?
Oh, yes, very much so, because the United States was never a Catholic country. It was founded on, the Lockean Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were really sitting ducks to be taken in by this.
Well, that indifferentism, that's the thing.
Yeah, religious indifferentism is very, that it really doesn't matter what religion you belong to, for salvation and things of that nature. So this country, and it's interesting too, because in my research, I've spent a lot of times in theological libraries, looking up, just getting a real picture and a structure of how we ended up where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have found that in English, in these English theological journals, these are things that the priests and the theologians would be reading, things by the Jesuits like Theological Studies or the American Ecclesiastical Review or Homiletics and Pastoral Review. They're very good theological journals. Yet very rarely do you come upon a treatment of liberalism itself. They talk about all types of problems. Monsignor Fenton was very good. Monsignor Fenton was probably the best in the United States, warning against the creeping modernism that was happening in the 50s,
mm-hmm.
Especially the 40s and 50s. But I think I've only found one article that really went after liberalism, and that was only something that was read by the priests. So we were really sitting ducks.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
For this revolution.
Well, I remember growing up, my uncle married a non-Catholic, and I can remember saying, well, gee, is my aunt going to go to hell? And I can remember being told, oh, no, you don't have to worry about it, because my parents had already been imbued with this idea that, well, it really doesn't matter what you are. We're good Catholics. We want to be Catholics. We think it's right. But they had lost this feeling that, hey, there is a true church, one true church. That's the only church, and you must belong to it. There is no salvation outside of it. They had lost that. It hadn't been pumped into their heads. And so it was okay, to just have a non-Catholic in the family. Everybody was just nice.
Yes, well, it was part of the whole American melting pot,
mm-hmm.
and so this type of thinking would make it possible for clergy to not really be formed in the true, especially 19th century, early 20th century anti-liberalism, anti-modernist militancy that the priests really needed to be trained in.
Yeah.
Archbishop Lefebvre got that training. Some others got that training, but for the most part, they weren't given the warnings. Father John O'Connor, he said, I was in, my Dominican formation took 14 years in the United States.
And was it any good?
Well, he said he got very good training as far as St. Thomas Aquinas and scholastic philosophy, and it was prior to the council. But he said, never once was I told about Freemasonry.
See?
He said, and I was a pastor in a parish for 4 years, and a parishioner come up to me and said, Father, what is the problem with Freemasonry? Why can't Catholic, why is the church against it? He said, I had no answer.
Isn't that interesting?
I had no answer. But what I want to get back to is the fact that if this Masonic plan outline would be successful, there are 3 ways we would know that it took place. The first, that if this plan was successful, somewhere in the recent past, it would produce an upheaval of such magnitude that the entire world would recognize that the Catholic Church had undergone a major revolution in line with modern ideas. Mm-hmm. It would be clear to everyone that there would be a great updating, a great change that had taken place.
Well, that's clear to us today.
Secondly, the way we would know it is a new theology would be introduced that would, in various points, contradict previous teaching.
There you go.
And number 3, the Freemasons themselves, they're proud men. They could not help but boast.
Well, didn't they at the Second Vatican Council or after
They could not help but boast, right? And that's the outline I want to cover here because, as we say, we'll give the spoiler. All those 3 things we see right now, mm-hmm. that there was an upheaval of great magnitude. The Church has undergone a major revolution. A new theology has been introduced, more in line with modern ideas, and the Freemasons themselves are boasting that, I think it was Yves Marcedon who said that what we have seen with Vatican II and with ecumenism, especially the acceptance of ecumenism, is that our ideas have flowed over the dome of St. Peter's. I'll find the exact quote later. But the Freemason Yves Marcedon boasted that Vatican II basically was a Masonic triumph.
Wow. Well, you have to wonder if Sunens was a Freemason when he said something about we've seen our 1789 revolution in the church after the council.
Boasted. Huh? He said Vatican II is the French Revolution of the Church. He said that as if it was a good thing, and as far we do know, especially by the work from Monsignor Villa, that various cardinals in the Curia, in the Vatican, in Europe, throughout the world, are Freemasons. We know that. But what's more important is the fact, well, I'll say it this way. Someone once asked Archbishop Lefebvre if he thought Paul VI was a Freemason. And Lefebvre responded, he doesn't have to be a Freemason. He thinks like one.
Well, and isn't that what they said in the Alta Vendita, that you don't have to have a pope that is a Freemason, he just has to be imbued with the principles?
Exactly.
So there you go.
And this is what they've accomplished. Do you want to take the time for me to read?
Sure.
The whole, the basic. Now, what I'm reading to is not the entire Alta Vendita document. It is the portion that we're dealing, because there's other portions of this document that we could talk to about in another program, where they talked about the deliberate corruption of society, corruption of women, that women would be targeted. That's also in the Alta Vendita, but that's not the part that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's not in your pamphlet, is it?
No. This pamphlet was very focused on the church.
Part 2.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, the sequel. Anyway, so here's the pertinent part of our discussion here. Here's the document. This is the Alta Vendita, the Masonic document, speaking. The Pope, whoever he is, will never come to the secret societies. It is up to the secret societies to take the first step toward the church with the aim of conquering both of them. The task that we are going to undertake is not the work of a day or of a month or of a year. It may last several years, perhaps a century, but in our ranks, the soldier dies and the struggle goes on. We do not intend to win the popes to our cause, to make them neophytes of our principles or propagators of our ideas. That would be a ridiculous dream. And if events turn out in some way, if cardinals or prelates, for example, of their own free will or by surprise should enter into the parts of our secrets, this is not at all an incentive for desiring their elevation to the See of Peter. That elevation would ruin us. Ambition alone would have led them to apostasy. The requirements of power would force them to sacrifice us. Here's a key point. What we must ask for, what we should look for and wait for as the Jews wait for the Messiah, is a pope according to our needs. A pope who thinks according to these modern principles I'm commenting here, but who's not necessarily a Freemason himself. The document continues. With that, we shall march more securely toward the assault on the church than with the pamphlets of our brethren in France, and even the gold of England. Do you want to know the reason for this? It is that with this, in order to shatter the high rock on which God has built his church, we no longer need Hannibalian vinegar or gunpowder or even need arms. We have the little finger of the successor of Peter engaged in the ploy. And this little finger is as good for this crusade as all the Urban IIs and all the St. Bernards in Christendom. It's an astounding document. It continues. We have no doubt that we will arrive at the supreme end of our efforts. But when? But how? The unknown is not yet revealed. Nevertheless, as nothing should turn us aside from the plan drawn up, we wish in this instruction, which we remain secret for the mere initiates, to give the officials in charge of the Supreme Vente some advice that they should instill in all the brethren in the form of instructions of a memorandum. Okay, so the first part of this was kind of the doctrine. Here's our plan. The second is, now here's how we are going to initiate this plan. Here's how we're going to make it happen. And that's the rest of what I'm going to read here. The Alta Vendita continues. Now then, to assure ourselves a pope of the required dimensions, it is a question first of shaping for this pope a generation worthy of the reign we are dreaming of. Leave the old people and those of mature age aside. Go to the youth, and if possible, even to the children. You will contrive for yourself at little cost a good reputation as Catholics and pure patriots. You're going to look like a conservative, good Catholic.
Infiltration. Mm-hmm.
Here we go. This reputation will put access to our doctrines in the midst of the young clergy, as well as deeply into the monasteries. In a few years, by the force of things, this young clergy will have overrun all the functions. They will form a sovereign council. They will be called to choose a pontiff who should reign. And this pontiff, like most of his contemporaries, will be more or less imbued with the humanitarian principles that we're going to put into circulation. It is a small grain of black mustard that we are entrusting to the ground, but the sunshine of justice will develop it up to the highest power, and you will see one day what a rich harvest this small seed will produce. In the path that we are laying out for our brethren, there are found great obstacles to conquer, difficulties of more than one kind to master. They will triumph over them by experience and by clear-sightedness. But the goal is so splendid that it is important to put all the sails to the wind in order to reach it. You want to revolutionize Italy? Look for the Pope whose portrait we have just drawn. You want to establish the reign of the chosen ones on the throne of the prostitutes of Babylon? Let the clergy march under your standard, always believing they are marching under the banner of the apostolic keys. You intend to make the last vestige of tyrants and the oppressors disappear? Lay your snares like Simon Bar-Yona. Lay them in the sacristies, the seminaries, and the monasteries rather than at the bottom of the sea. And if you do not hurry, we promise you a catch more miraculous than his. The fisher of fish became the fisher of men. You will bring friends around the apostolic chair. You will have preached a revolution in tiara and cope, marching with the cross and the banner, a revolution that will need to be only a little bit urged on to set fire to the four corners of the world.
Okay, so John,
it's a masterpiece of persuasive
yes,
writing.
And that was written in the early 19th century, so we're talking early 1800s.
Yeah, Pius IX, who, when did he ascend to the throne? On 1839, somewhere in there. I have my dates wrong on him because he reigned a long time. Anyway, he knew of this document, and he wanted to promulgate it. Leo XIII knew of this document, and he paid himself to have an Italian translation of Monsignor Dillon's book out. And so, but even with all that, most Catholics don't know about this.
But you can see now why, if they went to the youth. I mean, you see it even again today. There was a report this morning on the radio. I always throw these in when I hear these things, but they did some, I think, professors at Harvard. What else? Did a research on how many people consider themselves religious or have a religion. 1/5 of the country now no longer says they have any religion whatsoever. No, they may believe in God, but I mean, Christianity is basically dead. The largest number has always been over 50% Protestantism. At least they consider themselves Christians.
Right.
But now that number is less than 50%. So you see how they have been moving from, two centuries now into the third century of getting their principles just into the society, and we're living in it. We're just downright living in it.
As I said, it's the very air. It's the very air we breathe. The popes of the 19th century saw these liberal principles coming out of the French Revolution. As I said, the separation of church and state, false ideas regarding human freedom, religious indifferentism. They were fighting these things. They knew how deadly they were. They knew that no matter how sugar-coated and how pretty they seem, and how much they speak to the heart, or however they say, they knew that they were deadly. I want to pause a little bit. I said I would come back to separation of church and state. Because the American believes that separation of church and state means that the president will be a puppet of the Pope. If we had, and the Pope will really be governing the country. That's not accurate at all. I'll start by giving Father Dennis Fahey's definition of liberalism, which is probably the most concise and the best I've ever seen. Father Fahey explains that liberalism is the belief that there is any part of God's creation that is not subject to his domain. The belief that there is any part of God's creation that is not subject to his domain. Dogs and cats and man are part of God's creation, and man is subject to his domain, of course. But also, states, governments, and social institutions did not make themselves. They, too, are part of God's domain.
Yes.
They are part of the natural order of man to coalesce, to live together, and to form governments, to govern the people. And therefore, states, governments, and social institutions, being part of God's creation, are subject to his domain. They're not allowed to declare themselves free of the Ten Commandments. They're not really allowed to declare themselves free of the domain of Christ the King. They're not really allowed to proclaim themselves free of God completely and to question whether even God exists. Objectively, they're not allowed to do that. And so when we talk about separation of church and state, that is really the core of it, that states, governments, and social institutions have a duty to recognize the one true God and to base their law of right and wrong on what the gospel teaches is right and wrong and on what the church teaches is right and wrong. Under the social kingship of Christ, under this system, you could not have abortion, you could not have pornography,
divorce,
contraception,
right?
All of these things. Now, of course, modern man considers that to be a straitjacket. But when we talk about separation of church and state, this is ultimately what we're talking about, that states, governments, and social institutions do not have the right to proclaim themselves godless or to act according as if God doesn't exist, or to judge all morality based on a majority vote. Well, if we have enough people voting that two women can get married, well, then we make it law, and that's okay because the people voted for it.
Yep.
It doesn't work that way. So these principles, anyway, of it doesn't matter what religion you belong to, basic human freedom that says I can print anything I want, I can say anything I want, I can publish anything I want, and this idea that the state itself and social institutions must be free from God, this was really the main ideas of liberalism that was fomenting in the 19th century that the popes themselves were fighting. They fought it in full battle dress. Pius IX, really, I think if anybody really wants to get a grip on the papal battle against liberalism, get hold of Pius IX's 1864 Syllabus of Errors.
There you go. Yeah.
It's called a syllabus because it is that collection of the major errors of the modern world that the popes had condemned, not because they are modern. You know, the popes never condemned steam engines or
sewing
iPods
machines, yeah,
because they're modern.
Yeah.
But because they are principles that are against natural law, many of them, and against divine law. And so the Syllabus of Errors is the key document, and everything up to the Second Vatican Council was really based on the syllabus. Modernism then comes along, and what does modernism do? Modernism gets around all this by claiming that there are some aspects of Catholic teaching that can change over time. That what was quote-unquote true for the Church in the 19th century and what was Catholic doctrine in the 19th century will have to be changed or adjusted or updated or adjournamentized for the Church and for Catholics in the 20th century. It's the idea that there can be some transformation of the Catholic doctrine over the course of the centuries. Modernism was really a tool to break down the solid Catholic teaching, especially against the modern errors, against separation of church and state, against religious indifferentism, against false ideas regarding human freedom. If things change over time, then, well, in the 19th century we had the syllabus. Well, in the 20th century, we can have a counter-syllabus. And that's exactly what the Second Vatican Council was.
It was it was a counter-syllabus.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hitting that rather sudden, but it was a counter-syllabus because the whole idea of the council, John the 23rd himself was the first pope who, when he was elected, the progressives themselves said that we believe he favors our cause.
Sure, he opened the windows, didn't he?
He opened the windows. He was more of a Zionist. That's another program.
Yeah.
This idea of a new civilization of love, of men of all religions, and modern times demands that we have this new approach. He was very much enamored with ecumenism, this movement among Protestants for unity amongst themselves, getting the Catholic Church involved. The Second Vatican Council, the original documents that were worked on that were solid and in line with the Church of the Centuries, they were voted out within days of the Council's opening. The Vatican II was literally hijacked by the progressives who came to the Council in order to remake the Church into their own image and likeness, and these were the men who were full of modernist and liberal ideas.
Were they mostly German, do you think? Well, they always say they came from the Rhine.
There's the famous book, The Rhine Flows into the Tiber,
yeah,
which shows that mainly the French theologians and the German theologians and bishops had already been fully imbued with this liberal thought. And they believed that we had to change church teaching in order to accommodate the modern world. What that does, whether they realized it or not, maybe not all of them were of ill will. You know, if I lived back then, maybe I would have been duped by this as well. But the idea is that we have, modern man will not accept the faith. Modern man will not accept reason. So we have to change things in order to present it in a way that modern man will accept.
Yeah.
What this does, whether they realize it or not, it makes modern man the God we must appease rather than the God who should be the God that we must
falls
appease.
right into the rights of the Declaration of the Rights of Man.
Yes.
Oh, gee. Well, did it open the door also, would you say, for things like the interfaith gatherings in that too?
Well, absolutely, yes. The Second Vatican Council, we'll just talk about ecumenism for a minute. This movement among Protestants came up as really, I think it started kind of as a movement of Protestant missionaries, that they really wouldn't be, they'd be all over some mission countries such as India or Sri Lanka or Africa or even,
even China.
We'll leave it at that for now. And rather than be at cross purposes and fighting one another, well, why don't, we might do better to kind of join forces and work together for this common cause, which is the so-called evangelization of the people, according to a Protestant concept, which grew into this movement of unity amongst Protestants. Now, Benedict XV in 1919, he was invited to join in with the Protestants in this so-called movement of unity. Benedict XV said that he didn't object to this as a movement among Protestants, but it would be unthinkable for the Catholic Church to get involved with it because you, Protestants, are seeking for unity. We have unity given us by Christ, and we can never give the appearance of searching for something that we already have. Pius XI issued his encyclical against the ecumenical movement, as again, not so much against the Protestants themselves, because very interesting, there's a Father Edward Hanaho, terrific theologian from Graymore, of all places, in 1962, and he said, in a certain sense, the ecumenical movement among Protestants had a good side because the Protestants who were involved with it recognized that each one of their congregations did not have the source of unity inside of it, and they had to go out looking for it. Okay, that is something actually good.
Yeah.
We recognize our system is imperfect, and we have to seek a perfect system. The problem is, rather than seeking it in the Catholic Church, they sought it as a kind of a group of unity amongst themselves. And that's why Pius XI said it's unthinkable for Catholics to be involved with this in any way, and that unity can only arise from one teaching authority, one law of belief, one faith of Christians, which is the Catholic Church. And so the movement of unity has to be an outreach to non-Catholics to charitably and patiently and do whatever we can legitimately to bring them into the faith and to tell them that in order to be saved, it requires a transfer from your position as a member of a false religion to the true religion established by Christ. 1926 Mortalium Animus, major document on this topic.
Ecumenism.
1949, Pope Pius XII, an instruction on the ecumenical movement where he basically says the same thing. There is only one goal of unity, and that is for the return of the non-Catholic to the one true church.
Right.
Along comes now this new movement of unity where Catholics are involved with non-Catholics. And so the decree on ecumenism of the Second Vatican Council never says that the purpose of ecumenism is the conversion of non-Catholics. Robert McAfee Brown, who was a Protestant liberal Lutheran observer at Vatican II, he is rejoicing. He loves the decree on ecumenism. He says no longer are they calling us heretics. No longer are they saying that we have to repent and come back to the faith, but that all denominations, the Catholic Church included, is responsible for the sin of division, and we all have to apologize to one another for this. And very telling, and this is a principle of ecumenical documents. There is vital information missing, vital components that are not there that should be there. And the two vital components missing from Vatican II's decree on ecumenism is what? Is Pius XI's 1926 encyclical against ecumenism, Mortalia Manimus, and Pius XII's 1949 instruction on ecumenism. Not mentioned, not even footnoted. It's as if that Vatican II had this brand new beginning based on a movement, a concept of unity that came straight from the World Council of Churches.
There you go, World Council of Churches. That's what I was trying to remember. What they got together and that what they formed. Yeah, isn't that interesting?
And so after Vatican II, he's an Italian. I can't remember the name of the Jesuit. It'll come to me. But for the first time after Vatican II, for the first time ever, this happened in 1967. I can't remember his name. But he basically said, he gave a speech to the World Council of Churches as the formal representative of the Catholic Church to the World Council of Churches, and he basically said that the new movement of unity no longer means non-Catholics converting to the Catholic Church, but that all of we Christians turn to Christ together.
That
got a standing ovation. The Vatican did not discipline him. In fact, by 2002, Pope John Paul II made him a cardinal.
Oh boy.
Okay, just one of the examples of this shift of church teaching and church practice brought about by the Second Vatican Council.
Well, John,
the other big one, of course, is the new teaching regarding religious liberty, wherein prior to the Second Vatican Council, and in line with common sense, you would never say, well, first of all, I mean, do I have a right to spread lies about you?
No.
Do I have a right to say, Judy and John Sharpe, they're really not married? No. I mean, they're nice people and everything, but they're really not married.
No.
Do I have a right to spread lies about your mother?
No.
I don't have a right to spread lies about anyone.
That's correct.
This is precisely what non-Catholic religions do. They spread lies about, they may not know it. I mean, suppose I really, it doesn't matter whether I'm sincere or not. Objectively, I have no right to spread a lie about someone, even if I think I'm correct. Same thing with non-Catholic religions. No one has the right to spread lies about Jesus Christ, to claim that he didn't establish a church, that he didn't establish the priesthood, that he didn't establish the seven sacraments. No one has the right to spread lies about Christ's mother, that she's not mediatrix of all grace, okay? Error has no rights. And so up to the Second Vatican Council, everything was focused on the truths of the faith, the truths of divine revelation, the truths of the deposit of revelation, and that those who, for whatever reason, whether it be in their intellect or their will, they do not hold the truths of the truths of the Catholic faith, well, the Catholic Church would tolerate these false religions because it does more harm than good than to try and eradicate them, especially in the social order. So you would tolerate it. You don't know if it's in their intellect. You don't know if it's in their will. But you never say you have an absolute right. There is the absolute right to believe a lie. Vatican II comes along, and they make the shift from truth, objective truth, being the criteria, to the ontological dignity of the human person.
Oh, there you go again, yeah.
And then Yves Congar said that.
Yeah.
He says it outright. Under Leo XIII, under Pius XII, under Pius XI, the most important aspect of this was objective truth. Now, with Vatican II, we have shifted it and placed everything on the ontological value of the human person. And because of your dignity of the human person, if you want to believe that there's four persons in the Trinity, you have the right to. If you want to believe that Jesus Christ is not the Messiah and have Passover every year as if Christ never existed, you have the absolute right. See where we are. And so this is the crux of the document on religious liberty. And what does Archbishop Lefebvre said? It's back in 1964 when this was being worked on and promulgated. Lefebvre said the Freemasons themselves have made a public announcement that we hope that the Council will promote the document on religious liberty. It's their thing. It's their thing.
So that brings us back to Freemasonry. So what it means, it's the Freemason mindset, goals, they were imbued totally in the council.
Very much so, yes.
So
yeah,
there
very
you go.
much so, because there was the shift from from being more theocentric, God-centered, to man-centered.
Centered, yeah. Well, it's just amazing to me. I was thinking when I was in California, I've said this before, but Cardinal McIntyre was very much against the council, I think. He was very slow to make changes.
I understand McIntyre was a good man.
Yeah, there were a few. He died in 1970, I think, or very shortly after, but there were no changes made. Well, maybe they started to when he was like dying or something, but he held off. I think there were a few of them in the United States, but many of those in the United States have had to have been already coming up through the ranks. We talked about Bella Dodd, infiltrated with those younger people coming up and, being part of the church, whether they were in we know the seminaries. We know what happened to the seminaries early.
Well, a big part of this is this modernism that Pius X had fought against very strongly. When he was, after he had promulgated, the oath against modernism and all these things in place, a committee of vigilance to keep out for, to watch out for modernist thought amongst teachers and things like that, and bookstores and things, books being taken off the shelves and things like that. Someone congratulated Pius X, saying that, congratulations, you've killed modernism. He said, no, I've not killed it. It's only going underground. And if my successors are not vigilant, it's going to rear its head again worse than ever.
And it did.
And that's exactly what happened. The modernists, because he talks about, Pius X himself talks about these clandestine groups. Now, he wasn't necessarily talking about Freemasonry. He was talking about these modernists who, as he said, promote one another, stay in touch with one another, praise one another to the skies. And this modernism resurfaced. This too is an entire program we could do, but I have to condense it. But this modernism resurfaced under the guise of something called the New Theology, and the New Theology was against, basically, to really condense this. The New Theology was basically against the scholastic philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas, which gives us very precise terms and structure and clear thinking. It wanted to mishmash the distinction between the natural order and the supernatural order. And thirdly, it believed that religion must change for the sake of changing times. I'm trying to think of the quote from Father Bouliard. Father Bouliard, in the 1940s, he said, a theology that is not current is not true, is not good.
Oh, goodness.
Now he said that now Pius XII, too, was keeping all that under wraps. But who are the champions of this new theology that were under a cloud? Father Henri de Lubac.
I knew you were going to say that name.
Father Yves Congar. Father John Courtney Murray.
Yeah.
Father Edward Schielebex. All of these men, Father Bouliard, okay, these men were proponents of this new theology, very carefully crafting it that many people can read it and not see what they're doing. But someone like Father Garrigou-Lagrange saw very clearly what de Lubac was up to.
Saw through it, yeah.
Great theologian named Father David Greenstock, in an article called Thomism and New Theology, October 1950, the Thomist, lays it all out, what they were up to. But the great tragedy is when John the 23rd called the council, he insisted that these modernist theologians were brought to the council to become expert theological advisors to the council and to the bishops.
Would they be called the Paridi?
They're called the Paridi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and they were given pretty much. The Vatican II. There was all those battles going on between the conservatives and the liberals. But it's very interesting because in the 2 years preparing for the council, now John the 23rd insisted on this, and in the 2 years preparation of the council, Archbishop Lefebvre who was on the Central Preparatory Committee, he was at a meeting where he saw a list of these theologians who have been invited. Dilu Bach.
Oh my gosh.
Ratzinger, who was under suspicion of the from the Holy Office.
Yeah.
Who else did I mention? John Courtney Murray.
Yeah.
Eve Congar, whose book on the church was full of mind. It was a minefield.
Yeah.
So Archbishop Lefebvre, after the meeting was over, he lagged behind so that it was only he and Cardinal Ottaviani left in the room. And the Archbishop said to Cardinal Ottaviani, I saw some names on this list of theologians coming to the council. They really shouldn't be here. And Cardinal Ottaviani just pointed upstairs. He says, what can I do?
Oh, boy.
The boss wants them. He wants theologians with a reputation.
Maybe
that's kind of like marrying a girl with a reputation.
But is it possible that he might have wanted that, or do you think he was already so well? I guess we're talking about John the 23rd, right?
Yeah, I don't think John the 23rd wanted the destruction of the church. See, one of the things you have to remember is, and this is true of many of these dear people, is that a liberal is often incapable of foreseeing and living with the consequences of his own liberalism. He'll set something in motion, a clear-thinking Thomist or someone will come and say, if you start this, you're going to end up in destruction. You're going to end, oh, no, that won't happen. Everything will be fine. It's kind of like, we could give a whole little exegete on Hitchcock's movie Rope.
I've never heard of that one.
Rope. It's one of his best movies. A professor taught that the enlightened man is above the morality of normal people.
Oh, boy.
Jimmy Stewart plays this part. And so what do two of his students do when they're out of college and living on their own? They kill a man just for the sake of doing it, just to show we are superior people. We are not bound by morality, the morality of the common herd. So they invite people to they stuff the body into a chest. They invite these people to a party, including the boy's parents, whom they just killed. They invite Professor Rupert, who's Jimmy Stewart. They have this party, and then Rupert finds out, long story short. But basically, when Rupert is horrified, the student said, we're just acting out your principles.
Yikes.
And Stewart says, well, you've given my words a meaning I never intended, and there was something in me that would prevent me from doing what you've done. Well, it doesn't matter whether there's something in me or not, whether there's something you do. If the principle is bad, people are going to follow it to its end. Mm-hmm. So John the 23rd might have been a Professor Rupert. He might have not foreseen the consequences of what he set in motion. But these liberal theologians, gaining the upper hand at the council, deliberately drafting, when we have this as on record, they deliberately drafted ambiguous phrases. The documents are ambiguous. They're flawed documents, ambiguous that you can, you read
into what you want,
thing and it's good, and then you read something else and it can be interpreted in a non-Catholic way, which is exactly what St. Pius X said modernists do. And then the men, the Pariti, who had drafted those ambiguous documents and knew how they were going to exploit them afterwards, Paul VI then gave them to have the quote-unquote authority to be the official interpreters of the council to the world.
Yeah, gosh.
And we've ended up where we've ended up.
Where we are today. Oh, what a mess. Well, John, one of the things I do notice that the traditionalists, the people that I have met and I come in contact with, are real good about St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, they just delve into St. Thomas Aquinas. They use him all the time and reference him constantly. I think that's a hopeful sign, at least in our little community.
Well, St. Thomas Aquinas is really the answer. He's really the answer. There was actually, while this new theology was bubbling up underground, there was also a movement of Thomism that was underway with people like Father Garrigou-Lagrange, names that a number of the listeners probably have never heard of, Father Anthony Lee, Father David Greenstock, and they were all saying, in dealing with modern man, we can't leave him in his subjectivism. See, because part of this new theology was saying that we have to drop St. Thomas because modern man's not interested in him, he doesn't understand him, and we have to then use the modern existentialist philosophies, a new marriage of Catholicism and these existentialist philosophies, in order to reach out to modern man, in order to speak to modern man in a language that he understands. Now, this thinking goes back to the end of the 19th century, this approach, with Blondel going through de Lubac and Bilyeu and all this business.
Yeah.
And Father Greenstock, he would say, look, you can't, the reason modern man is awash in muddy thinking and subjectivism is precisely because of these new philosophies that are out of step with reality. So there's no way then you can use these modern philosophies that have caused his muddy thinking as an antidote to the muddy thinking. And the only answer is a revival of Thomism. This was going on throughout the Church in a small way in the 40s, the 50s, up to the 60s, and Vatican II just killed it.
Wow.
Because the documents of Vatican II are not written in Thomistic, scholastic language. What were they written in? Again, it's the new theology all over again. We want to speak in a pastoral language that'll be acceptable and understood by modern man. Yeah. Have you ever tried to get through Gaudium et Spes?
No, I've heard about it. I will not try.
You just wade through acres of slush.
Well, I heard it was really a blueprint for the New World Order.
Well, I don't know about that. Maybe it could be. It could be. The point is that it's definitely Teilhardian in the beginning, that man, this business of man coming of age and all this business. But it basically, Michael Davies put it this way. He said that Gaudium et Spes is pervaded by the notion that all men are men of goodwill, Catholic or non, and so that the duty of the Church is to work with man, work together in order to make the world a better place.
So forget the Bible.
Well, what they forget is the age-old teaching of the two kingdoms, that there are only two kingdoms on earth, the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan. And everyone is either part of one or the other. And the kingdom of God is, of course, the Catholic Church. And those outside that kingdom, willy-nilly, are part of the kingdom of Satan. And it's the duty of the Catholic and the Church to, again, using the term transfer, to work towards that transfer of souls from the kingdom of Satan to the kingdom of God. Whether they are members of a Protestant sect, whether they are secular humanist, whether they're members of the synagogue, they're outside of the kingdom of God.
Right.
And so this division of the world of the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Satan was knocked down at Vatican II and replaced by this new, let's work together, all of us work together in human solidarity to make the world a better place. That's kind of a basic theme of Gaudium et Spes.
So there you go, New World Order that encompasses all of us. We'll all get along. Can't we have a nice brotherhood here?
Boy, well, I don't know.
Talk about Masonic.
Unless you oppose gay marriage.
Oh my! Well,
then your car will be keyed. Your
yeah, jeez, and it's like everything else, John. One state after another. Pretty soon it'll be a national law, and so they'll be married in any state. Doesn't matter. It's going to happen, and I just can't imagine how God is going to punish us. I'm just waiting for that. There's an excellent line in the back of your Alta Vendita. On page 32, I thought this where you write about only she can help you. I mean, we know that Our Lady is our answer to everything. But at the end of it says, modernism and naturalism will all be gathered in a great ecumenical gathering. I thought that was funny. With the prince of this world, we know who that is, to receive the communal head crushing from the heel of the Queen of Heaven. I just love that because it's going to happen. I don't know if it'll be in our age or we'll still be alive, but that will be a wonderful sight to behold. I'll tell you.
The Psalms say, "Unless the Lord build a house, they labor in vain who build it."
Yeah.
And this whole structure from the council, this I don't know if we have time to even quote the liberals and the Freemasons.
Oh, sure, we do. Go ahead.
Who are, Yves Marsedan, talking about Vatican II. He said, Catholics must not forget that all roads lead to God, and they will have to accept that this courageous idea, he's talking about ecumenism, and this courageous idea of free thinking, which we could really call a revolution, pouring forth from our Masonic lodges, has spread magnificently over the dome of St. Peter's.
There you go. Yeah.
Marcel Prelot, senator of the Daube region of France, liberal. He said, we had struggled for a century and a half to bring our opinions to prevail within the Church and had not succeeded. Finally, there came Vatican II, and we triumphed. From then on, the propositions and principles of liberal Catholicism have been definitively and officially accepted by Holy Church. Okay, well, it hasn't been officially accepted, but it has the appearance of being officially accepted.
Yeah, correct.
Because, as we know, the Second Vatican Council is not binding on Catholics at all.
Pastoral.
Archbishop Lefebvre asked Archbishop Felici, who was on the theological commission. Well, I forget what it was called, but they said, "What's the theological note? What's the weight of these documents?" And Felici said, we have to distinguish those things that have been already part of infallible definitions. Of course, we have to accept them. But anything of a novel character, we have to make reservations. So the Catholic has the duty not only to make reservations, but I would say to resist this new orientation that comes from the Second Vatican Council, unfortunately, that is alive and well in the Vatican to this day.
Yeah, you bet. Well, you have in your pamphlet as well that Paul VI gave this explanation where it says, given the Council's pastoral character, it avoided pronouncing in an extraordinary manner dogmas endowed with the note of infallibility. So you don't forget the Second Vatican Council; you'll be thrown in the lake. Well,
this is good that we're having this discussion, because right now there's an awful lot of people celebrating its 50th anniversary.
Oh, please.
That's like celebrating 62. The anniversary of the bubonic plague.
Yes. Typically John Vennari. Very good, John. Very good. Well, go on now. I want to throw in something about communism. Where does communism come into this whole Freemasonry thing?
I guess it kind of could be summed up in the book that I talked about earlier, Grand Orient Freemasonry Unmasked, by Monsignor Dillon. The full title is Grand Orient Freemasonry Unmasked, subtitle as the secret power behind communism. And the problem is that many of us, because of the history and because of the Soviet Union, we make the mistake of equating communism with Leninism, communism with Stalinism, believing that communism manifests itself at the point of a gun, at checkpoints all over the city where you need your ID, of people who are against communism being taken away by secret police in the middle of the night, ritual execution, KGB executions, violent attacks on the church. That's Stalinism, Leninism, communism, but it's not communism all by itself. Communism is basically the belief that man is utterly a material being. There is only one reality, and that is matter, as Pius XI says, the blind forces of which evolve into plant, animal, and man, so that you and I, Judy, we're just a gorgeous pile of atoms.
Yeah, they go into the ground and decay, and that's the end of us.
But also, it really means too that there is no you. If we're just a pile of atoms, if you're just a pile of atoms, where do you come from? Where does your where does your intellect come from? Mm-hmm. Where does your will come from? When do you get this? When you put 2 atoms together? 15 atoms together?
How could they be
1,000 atoms together? When you have enough atoms to have a cockroach? When you now have enough atoms to have an elephant? You don't exist. You don't exist. There is no humanity under this system. And so, as such, there is only the highest power. There is no God. The highest power is the state, and man is godless. Now, there was an Italian communist named Antonio Gramsci. You've probably heard of him.
Oh, yes.
And he was a dedicated Marxist, but he was not a Stalinist or a Leninist, because he believed it was a great mistake to force communism at the point of a gun. And he basically said his method is that sometimes communists have to work with people who they don't necessarily agree with. You don't have to have this straight party line of everybody thinking exactly as Moscow has them think. But most importantly, he was born around the early 1890s. He grew up in Catholic Italy. He grew up. Now, this is going to ring bells with the Alta Vendita. He grew up submerged, surrounded in Catholic culture and Catholic atmosphere, and the church bells waking you up in the morning, and your life revolving around the liturgical calendar, and the priest coming and blessing your farm animals, and the whole Catholic atmosphere. And he knew the power of culture, and he knew the power of atmosphere. So his approach was that rather than force communism at the point of a gun, you simply work to secularize people to the point of godlessness, to the point that where they are either indifferent to Christianity or, better yet, hostile to Christianity. But he's very happy with indifference. That Jesus Christ has no place in social commerce. He has no place in government institutions. Do this, and you have accomplished the goal of communism without firing a shot.
Yeah.
This was Gorbachev's method. But I will say, too, that Gramsci would have loved the Second Vatican Council, because what did Vatican II accomplish? First of all, it refused to condemn communism because of the Vatican-Moscow Agreement. Now, it's supposed to be a council to deal with the problems of the modern world. Communism, we're talking about now Leninist Stalinism, was the most brutal system of atheism that the world has ever seen, most highly organized, worldwide, most powerful. Second Vatican Council, which is supposed to be dealing with problems of the modern world, refused to mention it or condemn it, because John the 23rd wanted, in the name of ecumenism, wanted representatives from the Russian Orthodox Church, so-called, to be observers at the council, and Khrushchev said, yeah, sure, I'll send them, providing your council doesn't condemn communism or the communist state. And John the 23rd said, okay.
Yeah, agrees. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll agree to that. And during the council, there were council fathers who tried to get communism condemned. Again, Archbishop Lefebvre was part of it, Father Segal was part of it, Bishop Carley was part of it. They presented 450 signatures that were conveniently lost in a drawer.
How interesting.
It was supposed to be in Gaudium et Spes when they were talking, and Gaudium et Spes just talks in general in the end about modern atheisms. It footnotes Pius IX's encyclical against communism, but it only gives the Latin name, Divinus Redemptoris.
Oh, really?
It never mentions communism.
Oh, my. Mm-hmm.
You know, so Gramsci would have loved it, because you ended up with this man-centeredness, and especially Paul VI's closing speech at the council when he talked about opting for man's dreams, his hopes. And then Paul VI turns to the governments of the world. What does the church ask of you? Only liberty. Only, just let us have our churches and we'll be happy.
Wow.
You know,
wow.
And this opting for man, everything centered towards man. You remember the 19th, remember the buzzword involvement? And the priests chucking off their clerical garb and going into the inner cities and helping the poor.
Of course.
And the bishops telling the contemplative Carmelites, you know, you're just wasting your time. Don't sit around praying.
Right.
Get out
Mm-hmm.
and do something.
Right, yes.
Get involved in the soup kitchen. Help get together and clean up a highway.
Here we go, the humanitarianism again.
Yeah,
social
and
worker.
This was the spirit of the Second Vatican Council through a keynote address given by Paul VI. Now, Paul VI did speak about God and things pertain to God, but everything from the council was towards humanity. It's exactly what Gramsci wanted.
Wow.
You elevate humanism, and human solidarity must increase and Christ must decrease.
So what came out of a council of the Catholic Church was basically communism. You could say
communist
that.
thinking and Masonic
and Freemasonic, yeah.
And it's exactly what Bishop Graber said, that they don't want to destroy the church, but they want to use the church as a vehicle to promote their ideas. Better yet, under the veneer of Christianity.
There you go. Well, you know what? We're out of time.
Okay.
For those who have not, a copy of the permanent instruction should have it. It's a little pamphlet. You can get it from you, John, I'm sure. Get it from us. They should be given away to anybody and everybody you know. Just put them in your Christmas cards. Too late this year, but maybe next year. and make sure that they know it. Another one, John, Liberalism as a Sin is another good one, isn't it? And
yes, that's the type of book that will change your life.
Yeah, and also just even another little pamphlet. Monsignor Juan was really onto Freemasonry early on, and he has a little pamphlet, Papacy and Freemasonry.
Yes,
it's called.
And this was a man
speech
who was
by him.
appointed by Pius X, I believe, to study and expose secret societies.
So for those who are listening who are not that familiar with this or would like to have more information, there's so many things you can get. And let's never forget Father Fahey, because we always go back to him. Anything you want to know about all the problems you can get from Father Fahey. So, well, John, thanks a million. Is there any last comment you want to make before we say hello?
Could I leave my email address if somebody wanted to contact me?
Sure, absolutely. And I'm going to put it up on the website also.
Okay,
but go ahead.
cfnjjv@gmail.com. So it stands for Catholic Family News, John Vennari @gmail.com. And, but my closing comment will be very simply the Athanasian Creed, that whoever wishes to be saved must adhere to the Catholic faith whole and inviolate, without the modernization, without the changes, without the aggiornamento that has been the plague of our Holy Church for the past 40 years.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. Well, this is great. John, thanks a million. Maybe we will have a part 2 because there's so much to cover. And I think
there's a lot.
Yep. And we need to do that. We need to just keep getting this information out to people. God bless you and your family.
Thank you.
Again, Happy New Year.
Yeah,
and
same to you.
We'll talk soon. Notre Dame de Chartres. Pray for us.